Well, it's great to see you here, Esther. Thanks so much for being on the Building a Better World podcast. Excited to have you on and to have this conversation. How have you been?
Good. The usual, on the road quite a lot. So yeah, but I'm all good.
Nice. And again, just to introduce you, you are the founder and CEO of Hundo.xyz. Please, I'd love to hear more about, your background and kind of how you started this and, kind of what got you to where you are now.
Yeah, good. So I've worked in youth unemployment, youth issues for more years than I care to admit now. And the journey for us into metaverse, into Web3 was really sparked by Outlier Ventures, who accepted us onto their Basecamp accelerator program, which literally was kind of like buckle up for 12 weeks and it's not going to stop. And really for me, what we were always grappling with was how do you deal with the fact that the first ever digital native generation in the history of the world is struggling and not able to access frontier tech, new tech roles in this kind of burgeoning space where we keep seeing, how much the metaverse is going to be worth, by 2030, but it's kind of going, you can't realize the future without the future builders. So for me, it really became about how can we effectively use this technology and use this moment in time to really galvanize around the idea that young people need to play a massive role in this space. They need to be actively building in it, informing it, shaping it, challenging it. And Hundo was really built around going, how do you start to bridge effectively the education to employment journey in a world that is just completely being transformed, including by companies like SuperWorld, actually.
Awesome. Yeah, no, we're very excited about the work that you're doing in Web3. And we're also, honored to be a sister portfolio company of Outlier Ventures with you guys. So that's awesome. I just saw Jamie in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia last week. So it's great to see him in person. Wanted to jump more into your personal life and kind of your background. I know that you were the first female DJ producer, and you owned a specialist vinyl store in Manchester.
I did.
Tell me more about that. That's pretty awesome.
So I collected records, vinyl from like the age of 11, pretty obsessed with music, and I also found myself in a world that was quite heavily, to an extent still is, quite heavily male dominated. And I would find myself standing next to a lad in a record shop waiting to get served for about 10 minutes because they just thought I was his girlfriend. So I was like, I'm actually quite bored of this. It was a combination of annoyance and passion that I decided to open a vinyl store, which was, I often refer to it as more like a community center than a business. But it was, I was 21. Yeah, I have absolutely zero regrets about doing it. It was an amazing, it was an amazing ride.
That's awesome. It sounds, I've read Richard Branson's story with Virgin, and the way you've described it sounds like as a community place. Sounds like a similar kind of thing when you started Virgin Records, like place people would come and hang out.
Yeah, it has been, and it's been really fascinating to me to see the transition that music and kind of media entertainment space are making into Web3 and metaverse. I think it's a brilliant move, particularly around ownership, particularly around artists, musicians getting paid. So I find that space, I keep one eye on it, because I think it is a really interesting, it's an interesting part of the metaverse that's being built at the moment.
Yeah. I mean, the fact that these people in the community can also, be stakeholders in the music that's being produced and interact with musicians and the music that's being created and influence that, it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, and and I have some friends who are quite well known, quite successful producers. They've been starting to incorporate AI into their production, not using it to replace, but to kind of bring it. So that's, anyway, that the music rabbit hole is one I could spend a long time in, so we we won't go there.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. No, I love it. I think music and the arts are such a inspiration for anyone who's building in tech. So sounds like that really kind of got you inspired. You're doing a lot of other things as well that you kind of, bringing together in terms of the metaverse. Would love to hear more about that in terms of what you're doing with All Stars Women NFTs and Club and a DAO, and then the GTA metaverse as well. I would love to hear more.
Yeah, so I'm part of Global Tech Advocates, which is a voluntary group of about 25,000 people who work in and around tech and the industry. So things like tech for net zero, diversity, inclusion in tech. So of course I was like, we definitely need to have a GTA metaverse group to talk about, sort of this very, what I consider like quite an exciting space, but also one that, to be honest, even people working in tech, as an industry, are still kind of getting their heads around. A lot of the time I get asked to speak, things, titles of, talks, including like, what's the point of the metaverse, as opposed to like, what are we doing in it? What are we building in it? I think it's really easy to forget just how, if you're in it, you're in it, and kind of like obsess about it. And it's all you think about, we talk about, and you're surrounded by communities, plural, including All Stars Women, which is headed up by Layla, who's just an amazing human. And it just feels like the whole world, is in this space. But actually, when you step out of that, certainly with the work that we do as well, it's kind of going, people are interested, they're excited. They're also a bit like, what is it like, where do I fit in it? And we see that, kind of not just we see that kind of like across the whole spectrum of stakeholders that we work with. So the metaverse group, I think for me, like everything that I do in this space is, including with Hundo, it is about trying to bridge people from Web2 into Web3 in a way that is accessible and not scary and not filled with loads and loads of jargon, even though I love it, and then sort of, want to sort of talk about avatars and, technology all day and all night. It's more about going, how do we ensure that there is an inclusive aspect to this where people do feel like they understand what it is, but then also can start to think about the practical applications of it. And I think that's probably like the biggest challenge, so all of these extra sort of other things that I do, like with GD and Metaverse, with All Stars Women in particular, Women in Web3, is trying to sort of shift the dial slightly in terms of people feeling that they can be part of this, and actually that it's quite important that they are part of it.
And so would you say, your kind of core values as it relates to Hundo, how do you kind of think about that in terms of this broader kind of, Web2 space and getting more people in?
Yeah, I think in terms of core values, it's very much my observation, and my experience, I suppose, which, like anything, shapes your worldview somewhat. But I think I always say, kind of in Web2, there really wasn't any obvious place for a diverse female founder at all. It was almost like it wasn't even a consideration. I didn't work in tech. I wasn't involved in tech. I don't have a tech background, and so for me, one of the reasons that I love Web3, and the metaverse so much is because there is like a very obvious place to be and to exist. So I think for me, the core value was about ensuring that we get to move away and to hopefully learn from, to not make the same mistakes as a lot of the issues that have happened with Web2. And it's not because I think that Web3 is this utopian panacea. I'm well aware that there are issues, within it as well. But it feels to me like much of Web2 felt like it very much came out of Silicon Valley, very much came out of, some core deeply centralized platforms, which are the kind of the incumbents of the way that we all kind of use the internet today at the moment. And it felt like, I don't think either is utopian or dystopian, I think it's always somewhere horrible in the middle, which is always slightly disappointing. But I think that idea that we are going to have to learn how to play nicely and well together between centralization and decentralization, and between real world goods, and virtual, world goods. I think it's quite an interesting time to be alive, to observe it. And I think for me, the value is about going, how do we ensure that users, of this new emerging economy have equal access, and have the ability to learn, earn, kind of monetize, in a different way. I think, in a way that's really, really shifting. And we see that a lot with young people at the moment, because it's going, the traditional, like, all bets are off, since COVID particularly. And now with things like, Chat GPT, which appreciate everyone is talking about. But I think getting to grips with just how fundamentally that has ripped apart the education system overnight. Seemingly in terms of going, like, who is going to get into $60,000 of debt and write a 10,000 word dissertation with no job or employment guaranteed at the end of it? And when you start to kind of see that shift, that's where I think it's kind of going. That's where it's sort of really important, to get to grips with how do we ensure that value in this new world reaches as many people as possible, rather than being this kind of repeat concentration of absolute wealth and absolute power in the hands of so few.
Yeah, and go into that more. Like, what specifically, how do you do that as it relates to Hundo? Love to hear kind of the user journey. If I'm interested in getting involved, how would I do that?
So obviously our domain expertise is kind of in with young people. So Gen Z is sort of the age group, that we talk about. But the reason for that is 16 to 24-year-olds today. As I said earlier, first digital native generation. Their kids will be growing up in a much more fully immersive world. So that it's quite a fascinating transition. And we really, but what you find with that age group is particularly during COVID, young people lost their jobs at 3 to 5 times the rate of every other age group. And then there were all these kind of tech jobs, not just in Web3 and Metaverse, but frontier tech in general. And for me, I was like, how is that even a thing? Like, how is it possible that kids who are using, Unreal Engine, and kind of, they're in Fortnite, they're in Roblox, they're in Sandbox already, decentralized, like, how is it possible for them to be using this technology for fun, but they can't get jobs in the industry? And that was just a crazy sort of dynamic for me, which I sat and looked at for a while. So with Hundo, in simple terms, we partnered initially with Ready Player Me. One, because, apologies for the buzzwords, because their avatars are cross-platform and interoperable, but also because we'd run a test with Innovate UK. We won a grant to pilot the use of avatars to remove and reduce hiring bias, which worked really successfully. So that's everything that you see on the Hundo platform. There's kind of quite a big thought process, and a reason that's gone behind it. It's not just because you can have an avatar and it's fun. That's also true and very important, actually. But it's about going, this is how you start to represent and present yourself in an increasingly digitized, increasingly immersive world. And to be able to get young people familiar and used to that technology in the context of learning, rather than in the context of watching Travis Scott in Fortnite, so every 16-year-old, our dream is that every 16-year-old can create a Hundo profile, set up their avatar, and then set up their digital skills profile. The technology behind that is obviously soul-bound NFTs in a digital skills wallet, and the purpose of that is to get rid of the CV resume. Because it's the most redundant, awful piece of paper on earth for young people, and also for the people who have to read these things, on the other side. So it's sort of going, wouldn't it be great if you could represent the totality of all of the skills that you're developing, both in the real world and in the virtual world, so that young people can start to see that the skills that they have, that they'd never really think to write on a CV, are actually incredibly valuable to kind of end employers or their future employment, depending on how they want to work. So what we want is young people to be able to start to look at the skills they already have, through gaming, through, you know, activity in world, all of that. And even, you know, even in the SuperWorld context, you know, if they brought a piece of virtual land and they're building on it and all that, that's a skill set. Like, that's a really good skill set. Or if they're buying land and trading land, whatever it is, you know, these are valuable skills. And it's helping them to kind of augment their mandatory education and qualifications with micro-credentials, you know, with all of the other activity that employers are always saying that they need. So that's what we want for every young person, and also so that they can start to see where the skills mismatches are, because, you know, even with you know, it doesn't make me laugh, it's just such a good example of how fast this stuff moves. You know, Solidity developers now, here you go, kind of like, yeah, Solidity devs are pretty high demand. You know, they're also looking at retraining, you know, upskilling into Rust, you know, and it's like, that's how quickly the technology is exponentially transforming even highly skilled professionals, and everybody is having to kind of keep up and you know, and stay on that journey. And I really would like, for the first time ever, young people to be like ahead of that curve, and out in front of it, rather than always kind of struggling to get work and struggling to find jobs, particularly ones that pay well, which tech jobs have a tendency to do.
Yeah, no, that's great. So it's basically, you know, kind of helping young people kind of bring together their physical and their virtual lives, and, you know, the skills that they're learning in both of those things, and incorporating soulbound tokens and, you know, other technology that makes it easy to kind of verify and to understand the skills of these applicants. What about on the employer side? What do you see that's happening there in terms of adoption of, you know, using these things? So when do you expect an employer to say, you know what, I don't need a CV, I'm just, you know, gonna kind of use a soulbound token to better understand your skill set?
I think we are. I think we're quite some way away from it in terms of mass mainstream adoption. But it's why for us, where we do actually see the most interest at the moment is with educators, which wasn't what we expected initially. But I suppose it does make sense when you think about it, you know, latterly, because they are at the hard edge of being stuck with a mandatory education system that they know isn't preparing their young people for work. So actually, as you know, we launched in November last year with CareerCon, which we're obviously now in like planning for again for this year. And that was really about bringing educators, young people and employers together, you know, into one space to start to try to talk through a lot of these issues, you know, that they're facing. So I think for us, Hundo's kind of like planted its you know, flag, I suppose, in being the bridge between these two worlds. So we're an incredibly Web2 interface. You know, you sign in with an email and a password. But what that means is what's happening now, which we're really pleased to see, is whole college groups want to onboard all of their students. So where we're having, obviously anyone in the world, you know, can sign up tomorrow. It's much more effective when you can go, here's 35,000 students from this location, these demographics, they are currently studying this is what their current skills profile looks like. And then you can turn around to employers and say, here are all the skills that you say you need, and here's a load of young people who've got them. And whether or not they want to access those as a, you know, for in terms of the employer, the way they will access that is being able to see the profile. And what I'm hoping is really, you know, obviously we love the, you know, the premise of soulbound NFTs and the skills wallet and all of that, but for the purpose of talking to an employer at the moment, it's kind of going, this is the skills profile. And the technology that sits behind it, the, you know, on-chain validated verified credentials, you know, all the rest of it is almost like, I think we'll be winning if that's not even, no, you know, a bit like we don't get on a call and ask like, you know, what cloud service is your website hosted on, you know. So and that's really where I think Web3 needs to start winning, is that ability to kind of go, the technology becomes so seamless and just part of everyday life, that you don't really notice it anymore, and certainly don't need to explain it. And that's why I'd say we're kind of, I think that's where we are still incredibly nascent. But I think the idea that employers, you know, if you turn around to an employer and say, would you like to never have to read a CV resume ever again? They universally say yes.
Yeah.
So if we're presenting profiles and secretly they are soulbound NFT tokens, I think that's absolutely fine. And eventually, who knows? Maybe it will. Maybe we will ultimately have employers staking, and doing all of the kind of the more sort of the more exciting bits of Web3, that we're into. But in the meantime, it's about starting to transition all of those, educated employers and young people successfully into what we hope will be a much more seamless world.
No, I totally agree. It's really about just again seeing what the benefits are and talking about those benefits and less about the technology and the features, etc. But just for the benefit of our audience who is very interested in Web3 as well, can you define kind of what a soulbound token is to you, and how you think about that and some of the benefits of using that technology in this use case?
Yeah, so the idea was that at the moment, if you pretty much on LinkedIn, or any of the, on a CV or anything, you can pretty much write anything. Like, that's the truth of it. And people, there is no way to verify absolutely in the way that there is on chain. That you have a proficiency in a particular subject, or that you have actually completed a course. So we wanted to make sure that there was a way for it to become, I guess, a source of truth and a kind of a proof point, so that people could have confidence both in what they're learning on the platform is also verified, recognized, but also that it ultimately it's about making sure they can transition properly. So the point of having soulbound NFTs was that it would be the whole wallet is bound to the identity of that person, albeit anonymized, self-sovereign, and they can give away as much access, revoke as much access to that data as they want. And the purpose of that really was there's no value in somebody stealing those badges, kind of stealing that profile, or trading those NFTs or anything like that, because it'll become really, really obvious really, really quickly if you have somebody's digital skills wallet where you've said that you can do all of these things, and then you get a job on the basis of that, and then actually, as it turns out, you very clearly have not done any of those things. So it was really we were trying to think about how do you best protect, I suppose, a person's identity, and how do they have confidence and trust in both the platform, and then also on the employer side, it's kind of going, if they're looking at these profiles, so they have that additional confidence that it is actually a proof point. So that was that was kind of why that's why we decided to go down that route.
Yeah, it's as the technology evolves, it's always very interesting as to the use cases, but I think this is probably the best use case of that technology that I could really think of.
Thank you.
Yeah, which is
and
awesome.
It is interesting, Hrish, because like a lot of what we're working on now is obviously if you have like a Hundo credential, it's like, well, it's just Hundo, like who are we? But what we're looking at the moment, what we're working at the moment is with Federation of Awarding Bodies in the UK, and kind of colleges, universities, to go, actually, if you have obviously the technology, is a soulbound NFT, but the fact that it is validated and verified by the issuing credential partner, it gives it that extra layer of trust, I suppose. So that's kind of some of the stuff that's more interesting, because again, that's how you're taking. I mean, for me, it just as an absolute example, I moved from the UK to the Netherlands, and trying to hunt down all of your pieces of paper, all your qualifications, like all the things that you've done is a nightmare. So I'm going, even just to like solve like the headache, this is like a really, really good use of the technology. And what's good to see is that, very, very centralized services like qualifying bodies, they are also seeing the value of this, because it's different. Web2 credentials at the moment are still individual, they're still all over the place. And we live in this world where it's kind of like everything is just everywhere. And we need to sort of be able to bring it, into one sort of central sanity check, so that people aren't just wasting time, all over the shop trying to find, just trying to hunt down, qualification that they got, 5 years ago, or in my case, 25 years ago.
No, I know what you mean. It's so long ago going to school and university. You brought up Chat GPT and, all the innovation that's happening and how the world is moving a lot faster. What do you think in terms of skills, in terms of what you're seeing? Can you talk about the future of kind of upskilling and, if I'm graduating from, high school or maybe even in high school or going to college, what should I be thinking about in terms of, how to deal with, things like Chat GPT that seem to be getting faster and faster every day. And, as I think about immersive tech or Web3, what are the skills that you think are most valuable over the next 10 years? And, how do I get those skills? Like, what's the best way to think about that?
Yeah, so I think I always refer to it, there's this fascinating graph where it sort of talks about innovation, that happened over time that was relatively linear. It sort of everything was kind of bumping along, steam train, and all of that. And then you just hit this kind of from sort of, the smartphone, upwards, you just hit this exponential, growth curve of technology. And I think AI ML is sort of kind of peaking, at that at the moment. And I think I think the resisting change is the worst thing you can do. You don't have to you don't have to like ChatGPT, you don't have to have a view on it. But I think, as societies, we can't ignore that this stuff is, I would say is creating sort of, a revolutionary approach, to how we think about jobs, how we think about careers, how we think about skills. Certainly with, on the kind of the AI ML side of things, a lot of the even entry-level roles now for young people moving into things, very traditional industries like healthcare, they're having to learn to use AI ML diagnostic tools to treat patients already. So we're already starting to see, I think for those people who are more, like content editors, moderators, all of that, with the best will in the world, I would argue, and actually I had a really good conversation with someone about this last week, it's still very much machine learning. I'd say that ChatGPT is a machine learning, I think artificial intelligence, synthetic intelligence, I'm short of probably the military, I'm not sure, how far we are with that, and I think what I find fascinating actually is the way that humans sort of try to put a human kind of like approach, onto sort of things that are still, as far as I know, machine like in their kind of behaviors. So I think it's good to be aware of the technologies and how to think about. I think for me, it's not. What am I trying to say here? Education used to very much be, you would go and do this, course or this degree, and then you would go and get a job. And the world just is increasingly not like that anymore. And the whole point of, sorry to bring it back to Hundo, but the whole point of not only just having the skills profile, but the ability to actually know what is coming next, what skills are useful to me, what do I need to know, and then be able to learn those skills both on platform and through third-party providers. That's where it kind of becomes really important, because I think this generation, certainly the one behind it, it's going to be an increasingly disrupted world, where you're going to need to learn new skills. I would argue kind of life for life. There isn't we talk about careers now in the context of people having 6, 7, 8, 10 different careers, side hustles, all of those things, or just the way that people start to earn money is being changed and disrupted. And I also look at young people, and they're seeing all the tech layoffs, all the kind of so thing going like nothing is it sounds quite negative, it's like nothing is guaranteed and nothing is certain. And that's true, in this kind of, this new world. But what is certain, and the things that you do have control over, are what we get to choose what we do in this world, and how we start to learn, to interact with that. So I think it will be a continuous skills development. And over the next 10 years, I mean, I look at the World Economic Forum, stats all the time, and it's kind of going, there are 1.1 billion new frontier tech roles needed by 2030, which is about 7 years away. That's 1.1 billion. That is a lot of roles. It's back to the point about employers. People aren't ready for, employers aren't ready for this, but I come back to the same premise of going, if every business and every individual in the world over the next decade, actually over the next century, is going to be working in, living in, earning in, and learning in an increasingly immersive world, then we are all going to have to become lifelong students, and we're going to have to just stop resisting the future, and sort of and actually play, as I said earlier, start to be active participants in it, and that starts with education, and that starts with learning.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. That with that estimate, sounds like we all have to just become more aware that this is a reality, and we have to take on this learning attitude if we don't have it already, that to be able to adapt to this new environment, we must learn new skills. So what's the one skill, like what's the one to, like if I were gonna try to learn something now, what do you think that would be? Is it a programming skill? Is it is it art? Like what is it? What are the top skills?
I'm going to give you it's a terribly politicians, type answer, but it really depends on what you want to do. I think that's the so I think people do get fixated on to work in tech or to be part of this world, I need technical skills. But actually, when we talk to employers, the biggest skills gap that they see is what they call soft skills. Which I call essential skills. And so that, and even just like work tech, we have with some of the teachers that we work with, like they've never heard of Slack. So you kind of get, there are some training centers work with, they don't have Wi-Fi. And so it's kind of going like there is this really big bridge, but I think the skills that are always in demand are those more essential ones, because I think I actually think in some ways I'd argue it's easier to learn very specific skills, for specific, like Solidity, like Rust, but I actually think having that more rounded, project management, if you want to know the biggest skill, the one that we see people crying out for, is community managers, so that's what I mean. I find it interesting, and it's why Hundo is quite a broad church in that respect. We haven't just gone purely into you must learn how to code, or you must learn how to do this. It's kind of going, this is a platform where you can stay on, where you can stay ahead of seeing what's coming down the track and what you need to know next.
Yeah. Are you also seeing, I know like the metaverse is obviously a very virtual kind of environment in many ways, or it can be, but we do have a world where there's different possibilities for growth due to regulations or local economies, and openness of certain countries to Web3 in general. What do you see globally in terms of where this growth is happening? If I'm someone who's just graduating, should I be targeting some of my efforts towards certain places in the world, or is this something that I don't have to be as concerned about geographies? What's the best way to play this?
That's a great question. It's an incredibly, I'd say it's an incredibly fragmented global picture. So obviously you have UAE, Saudi going all in, on metaverse. So I'm due to go over at some point, but I imagine that's a pretty hot, market to be in now. Terrible pun. So that's there. But then you see, South Korea at a government level. I think they invested about 187 million dollars into what they is the metaverse. So I think it really depends on the territory. There are some that are kind of lagging behind, and then there are some who are just like, this isn't even happening. This isn't even a thing. I would say that's shifting, quite a bit, but there is still, I think, from a regulatory perspective, there again, I always come back to education. There is so much work to do in terms of the decision makers understanding what this is, and that yes, you can either perceive it as a threat or you can actually see it as an opportunity, and start to work with it. So I think definitely those spaces are interesting. Other places that I see with adoption, sub-Saharan Africa, India, the really, really big territories, and obviously the US, there's regulatory, stuff going on there, but we met in Miami, didn't we, at NFT week, and it's kind of, so it is, I would say it's quite a mixed picture at the moment. I think there is an increasing will to try to start to put together what this is, what this could be, because I think we're going to need to. I think young people are growing up in an increasingly globalized environment, which is increasingly, in some ways, borders are getting harder, but in a kind of a virtual environment, there is an increasing sort of borderless approach and a globalized workforce. So I think it's, I would say the world is a big place, and a small place at the same time, and it's kind of going like being aware of where there is real adoption and a real kind of investment into the space at kind of government level, and that's certainly what you're seeing in, as I say, in the territories that I've mentioned. That's certainly where I'm seeing the growth. Yeah, no,
that's that makes a lot of sense. You have to be flexible, but also kind of focus in on those areas where the governments are really kind of stepping in and creating more interest and growth. That I wonder, how that will evolve as other countries kind of see this happening. I've seen it in a bit, and we've seen this with certain places that you wouldn't expect jumping on board because they want to lead. Barbados has done a really great job. Ambassador Gabriel Abed and that team, as well as other places in the world. Miami, where we are right now and where we met, is also Francis Suarez. Mayor Suarez has done a lot of amazing things, and the government of Dubai and Saudi is also as mentioned. True, and
you're right. It's even in Central, South, Latin America. Seeing adoption. It is it's an interest. It's kind of almost like those bigger territories, where you're really starting to see this. But then on the flip side, again, kind of sub-Saharan Africa, again, a lot of interesting adoption. I think it's almost in those, what I've seen is where there are territories with high populations, big populations, which also means high youth populations and very young populations, where things like AI, ML, robotics, automation, they are actually killing lots and lots of entry level roles, and it's happening at such a pace and at such a scale that I kind of feel like there is it's almost inevitable in those places, because they have to address and have to tackle the fact that the jobs that are traditional are just disappearing so quickly. And actually, when you get that sort of, the more young people who are facing disadvantage and poverty, the more that becomes a political and social problem. So I think that's where I notice. I think it's just an interesting pattern, to kind of go that they're more switched on, because I think they are seeing the effects of, like, you can't really ignore this because it's not going away.
Yeah, that's a great point. Well, I have a couple of fun questions kind of to wrap up here. So if you could take anyone to lunch, in history or current, in the tech space, or, actually any space. I know you like music and, have so many broad interests. Who would that be, and why? What would you want to accomplish, or what would you want to learn?
I'd love to take Arthur C. Clarke to lunch, because so much of what was science fiction, so much of what he said, and wrote about is kind of becoming reality, and that kind of level of sort of forward thinking. I would just love to bring that person back and go, what do you think of it all? Is this what you imagined it would be?
That's awesome. Yeah, just kind of get a sense for the future as well, and what's coming, to be able to ask people who, like himself, who can, again, give us insights into whether this is actually what he thought. Cool. And then also, if you were, if you had free reign, this is a more of a SuperWorld question, to buy anywhere in the world, in terms of virtual real estate, what are your favorite places in the world? Where would you want to plant a flag?
So it's actually the piece of virtual real estate in SuperWorld that I already bought. So this is a very boring answer, because it's actually NASA Mission Control. Because I went to NASA after South by Southwest, and then I was like, they had, kind of like an AR, VR, some augmented reality, and I was like, I messaged my tech co-founder, and I was like, has NASA bought Mission Control in SuperWorld yet? And he's like, no. I was like, buy it immediately.
That's awesome.
And the purpose of that was not, it was to be able to go, like, actually, being able to use virtual immersive spaces like what you're creating on SuperWorld, for education, training, learning, seeing all that is actually incredibly useful, for real world application. So yes, it was NASA Mission Control.
Awesome. Yeah, so you can recruit the future astronauts
Exactly.
to train in Hundo, and then upskill, and then apply for those jobs. That's a interesting application of that. You'd be happy to know that some of the guys who fund some of the space technologies have also had that similar strategy. So they're buying up all the space stations and launch facilities around the world. So you might have beat them to that. I've heard that they're acquiring a lot of the space facilities as they're being announced. So
it makes a huge amount of sense. No, I really do look at SuperWorld, and I just see it as this kind of way of layering, kind of, and in a very, very useful way. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate you being on, and loved hearing more about your perspectives on the future of education and work and learning and upskilling. Where can people find you on the web? Like, what's the best places to learn about your work and Hundo and other things?
Yeah, so obviously Hundo.xyz, you can sign up, create your avatar, have a look around, and then obviously LinkedIn is my is the go-to. It's the only channel that is like manageable in all of the channels. So yeah, just Esther O'Callaghan. And I'm, until my PFP gets kicked off, because it's not a real version of me, it is still an avatar. So yeah, you'll find me on there.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Esther. Really appreciate it. Can't wait to see you somewhere again soon. And congrats on all your success, and looking forward to watching all the things that happen this year and exciting developments at Hundo.xyz. Thanks again for being on, building a better world, and helping to build a better world. So appreciate all the work that you're doing.
Thanks for having me.
Yep. See you later.
See ya.
Bye.